So, you made it through. You survived the market storm. You used your cash, you bought the dip, and you weathered the absolute chaos. But guess what? The battle is far from over. In fact, one of the most critical parts is just getting started. Okay, so let's dive into the battle plan for rebuilding your strategic reserve. In this quote from Ray Dalio, it perfectly sets the stage. You know, in the world of investing, complacency is your worst enemy. If you think you've won just because the market turned a corner, well, that's a really dangerous mistake. Preparation isn't a one-time thing. It's a constant cycle.
Okay, so let's paint the picture, right? The crisis has passed, the market is starting to recover, your portfolio is finally breathing again, but your cash reserve, that primary weapon you had against all the volatility, it's spent. It's gone. And leaving it empty is like leaving your fortress completely undefended right after a massive siege. The work is absolutely not done.
And that brings us right to the core idea of this whole strategy. You have to rearm your financial arsenal. Seriously, this isn't just about, saving a bit of money. It's about strategic preparation for what we all know is inevitable.
And look, it's a totally fair question. You might be thinking, hang on, my money is back in the market, it's working for me while things recover. Why on earth would I pull any of it out? Why would I divert new cash away from these assets that are growing?
Well, here's the simple, unchanging answer to that. Market cycles, they're a fact of life. Crises, they happen. There will be another storm. We don't know if it's next year or in 10 years, but it's coming. And that strategic reserve, that's the one thing that lets you turn the next crisis from a terrifying threat into a massive opportunity. You just have to be ready every single time. All right, so let's get into the nitty-gritty, the mechanics of this thing. This isn't about guesswork or feelings, okay? It's a methodical, patient plan for reconstruction. Let's break down the exact steps you need to take. So the plan, it's basically broken down into two clear phases. Think of it like this. First, there's a quick, partial rebuild to get some immediate defenses back online, like putting up a quick barricade. And then second, there's the more patient, complete rebuild to get your reserve back to full strength.
Okay, now here's our first really critical number, our trigger point. It's 50%. And this is key. You don't jump the gun the second the market turns green. No, you wait. You only start this whole rebuilding process after the market has clawed back 50% of its fall from the peak. Why? Because this helps make sure you're not getting faked out by a false recovery. You know, what they call a dead cat bounce.
And that brings us to our next key number, 10%. Once you hit that 50% recovery mark we just talked about, your immediate goal is simple. Rebuild just 10% of your reserve. That's it. Think of it as getting your first line of defense back up and running. It gives you some immediate ammunition just in case the market decides to take another dive. Okay, let's make this super concrete with an example. Imagine the market just took a staggering 60% dive from its peak. You did what you were supposed to do. You used your entire reserve buying on the way down. Now the market starts to recover. So when do you act? When does it hit that 50% rebound point? Well, it's when it recovers half of that 60% loss, which means the market is now sitting at only minus 30% from its old peak. That is your signal. That's the moment you sell just enough of the stuff you recently bought to get that first 10% of your cash reserve back in the bank, just in case. All right, so you've got your initial 10% back. It's secured. Now it's time for phase 2, the complete rebuild. And as you can see here, you've got two different paths you can take, and it all depends on what the market is doing. You can think of them as the patient path and the opportunistic path. So, method number 1 is that steady, patient approach, rebuilding through dollar cost averaging, or DCA. You probably know what this is, right? It just means you're putting a fixed amount of money in at regular times. Now, if the market recovery is slow and gradual, kind of like what we saw for years after the 2008 crisis, this is perfect. You just go back to basics, back to how you built the reserve in the first place. You take a piece of your regular investments, say 50%, and you just direct it into cash until your reserve is full again. Simple. But what if the recovery isn't slow? What if it's strong and fast? Well, that's where method 2 comes in. With this one, you actively take profits off the table. You sell a small chunk of your holdings to get that reserve refilled much more quickly. I love how the source material puts it, you are selling a little hope to buy a lot of security. That really hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Now, this is such a critical point, and it's completely counterintuitive, so listen up. The best time to take those profits and rebuild your cash, it's not when you're scared. It's when everybody else is euphoric.
When you hear people talking about a new era and you see assets just soaring to the moon, that's your signal. That is precisely the moment when risk is quietly building up in this system all over again.
So there you have it, 2 really powerful methods. But this isn't a random choice, right? A real strategist knows which tool to use and when to use it. So now let's dig into how you adapt your strategy to whatever the market is throwing at you.
And that leads us to the key strategic question you have to ask yourself as the market recovers: DCA or profit-taking? Which one do you choose? And your choice is going to depend entirely on the character of the market's climb. Is it a slow, grinding recovery? Or is it a blistering, face-melting rally? And honestly, the answer is elegantly simple. If the market is rising in a moderate, steady way, you stick with the patient DCA method. Just let your regular contributions do the work for you. But if that rise is strong and fast, if you're seeing huge gains in a really short amount of time, then it's time to be opportunistic. That's when you use the profit-taking method to lock in some of those gains and get that reserve filled up fast.
Okay, so we've covered the why, the when, and the how. Now let's boil all of this down to the core rules of engagement. Think of these as the key lessons you absolutely need to carry with you.
So to wrap this all up, let's just focus on the most important takeaways. The source material actually calls this section à retenir, which is just French for to remember. And that's exactly what these are. These are the non-negotiable rules for your post-crisis battle plan.
Okay, let's run through them. First, don't rush. Start rebuilding only when the market shows a real recovery. Second, stick to the numbers. Grab that initial 10% back after the 50% rebound and then keep going from there. Third, be flexible. Use DCA for a slow and steady recovery, but don't be afraid to take profits if the market goes on a tear. Fourth, and this is a big one, stay vigilant. The next crisis is always a matter of when, not if. You have to always be preparing. And finally, number 5, think like a general. Your cash reserve isn't just leftover money. It's a strategic asset. It's a core part of your arsenal.
Look, if you only take one single thing away from all of this, let it be this: never remain disarmed after the war. Rebuilding your reserve, it's not just some financial chore on your to-do list. It is a strategic imperative. Because the next battle, it's going to start without any warning. Don't get caught unprepared.
And we'll end with this great piece of wisdom from the one and only Charlie Munger. We've laid out a framework here, right? A battle plan. But at the end of the day, your situation, your tolerance for risk, your timeline, all of that is unique to you. So take these ideas as building blocks, but use your own brain to assemble the strategy that is truly right for you.